All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys, girls, football fans, Malaysians, I am B Spike. You have now arrived at a train of thought. It's time to talk about the power rankings. We're not going to waste any more time and get straight to business. Now, a funny thing happened with the Fulton, Kentucky Zombie Tier this week. They are going to be in the exact same order as they were last week, so I can quickly speed run through a lot of this. Tennessee, go watch Vanderbilt. I'm so serious. Diego Papia and that crew down in Nashville, they've done a really good job this year. I think it's really high time that they get their flowers. They could make the college football playoff. They really could. And it may come down to a showdown with their in-state rival and the Volunteers. That could be a really fun matchup in a couple of weeks. I will say this for the Titans. They actually didn't look too bad against Houston. They played a respectable game. They ultimately just couldn't get the game to overtime. With about 90 seconds to spare, the Texans got down the field and kicked the field goal and ended the game that pretty much 3 people watched outside of Houston and Nashville. New York Giants, Jameis Winston experience. As I kind of mentioned in the Railway recap yesterday, Jameis Winston will give you the excitement and the adrenaline and the electric moments for good and for bad, and this is kind of what happened here. They played relatively well against the Packers, and then Jameis Winston gives you what he gives you, which is generally throwing an inno or a costly fumble that's backbreaking and devastating and usually leads to the loss in question. But that's effectively what happened here. And the Giants actually played relatively well in this game. They just had the mistakes, and they made too many of them, which that's nothing new, regardless of who the quarterback is. New Orleans, LSU coaching search. That's probably way more interesting and entertaining than what the Saints are doing right now. And as the Tigers' season's been an abject disaster, similar to the Saints, at least the Saints we knew were coming. The Tigers, not so much. And we'll see what they could actually do. And their boosters and all those people, the government in Louisiana, it's a wild situation going on down there. Let's see what they actually do. New Orleans is on a bye this week, so there's really not much to say. Except for, can they get a winning streak together? I will talk about their game in a little bit. Cleveland, Shador era begins. It may be a short era. It may not last too long. It may be only around until Dylan Gabriel returns. I wouldn't do that, but that may be how long it lasts. The point is, Shador Sanders is going to finally get a shot, and a legitimate shot, where he's got time to actually prepare and time to actually practice with the first team. And then he's going to get a matchup where he can ease his way in to becoming a starting quarterback. Can he pull that off? We will see. And can they stop wasting Myles Garrett performances? Because he's been absurdly great this year, as he is most years when he's not slinging helmets at people. We'll stay in Ohio and talk about Cincinnati next. Let Burrow rest. Please do. It's not worth it anymore to see Joe Burrow play the rest of the season. This season's effectively cooked. They're going to run out of time when it comes to trying to make the playoffs. They still got Baltimore twice. It's a disaster situation for a Bengals team that had so much hope for their offense. And don't get it confused, their offense is still really good. It's just that defense is awful, and I don't trust it at all to help them win a good amount of games against competent offenses. We'll see what they do with Joe Burrow, as apparently he had a full practice today. Las Vegas, another humiliating performance. Yeah, we probably should have seen it coming that the Raiders would get cooked by the Cowboys last night, or Monday night, I should say. And it was Pickens and it was CeeDee Lamb doing a lot of the cooking. And this was, there was nothing really they could do. Gino only threw 1 inno, that's fine. But the chances of the Raiders actually winning this game effectively ended when CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens served their punishment. After which point, both those guys basically terrorized the Raiders secondary, and the so-called Terror Twins basically said, all right, that's enough of this, and they can go out and get this W real quick and keep it moving. New York Jets finally benched Fields. Took it long enough because he's been pretty bad at throwing a football. Sure, he can run, he's athletic, but at throwing a football, it just doesn't work. And finally, they pulled the trigger and said, okay, that's enough of this, and we're going to move on to Tyrod Taylor. Now, Tyrod Taylor luck would probably have him basically get folded up like an accordion in the next couple of weeks. We'll see what happens with that. And in the meantime, between time, we'll see what he can actually do. Tyrod Taylor's first opponent as Jets starting quarterback, the Ravens. Good luck, boys. And Washington, more suffering. This was a pretty painful loss because this was a very winnable game over in Madrid against the Dolphins. And Deebo Samuel played relatively well. They ran the ball respectably. Marcus Mariota didn't make too many mistakes. The problem is, it's the final pass of his game where the mistake came, and that was effectively the end of said game. Yes, Washington also missed 2 kicks. That didn't help matters either. But Mariota played a respectable game until he absolutely had to have it and failed miserably in terms of getting it. This Commander season's effectively done too, and I would probably drop the same advice for Washington as I just did for Cincinnati. Better off resting your franchise quarterback from LSU, your franchise and Heisman winning quarterback from LSU. Don't bring him back. It's not worth it. Just take the L's and keep it pushing. Zombie tier games. Browns, Raiders, Shadir's first start. And he's facing a terrible defense. Now, Cleveland also has a worthy defense, which in theory should cause havoc for Geno Smith and get Shedeur the ball back repeatedly. Now, the Raiders' defense is competent enough to stop Shedeur, right? Max Crosby, are you going to introduce yourself to Shedeur Sanders? We will see. Falcons, Saints. New Orleans could actually get a winning streak, and I'm sure they would like not much more than beating the Falcons and causing even more humiliation for Atlanta, a team that has looked miserable over the last month. And they've lost 5 straight games, and they've also lost Mike Penix for the year. It's been an abject disastrous month. New Orleans coming off a bye and a good win against Carolina. Can they form a winning streak? It may ruin their tank a little bit, but they could actually form a winning streak if they beat a Falcons team that is looking very cooked. Speaking of Atlanta, you're going to lead off the Birmingham, Alabama Monkeys ball tier. Bad and worse. That's been the Falcons' last month or so, where they have looked miserable for a lot of this time period. Whether it's getting cooked by the Dolphins or getting cooked by the Panthers and a bunch of other games, a bunch of other stuff in between, it has looked really rough for an Atlanta team that going into this stretch was looking like a real challenger to Tampa Bay in the NFC South. They have not looked like that at all in the last month or so, and their season may be effectively done because for Kirk Cousins, that offense doesn't move like it should. If Drake London and Bijan Robinson aren't getting the ball, it's kind of curtains for a Falcons team that has promising offense, but it's just not going anywhere right now. I don't know what happened to that pass defense against Carolina. That was also pretty brutal. Arizona, remix. Basically, I could say a lot of what happened last week, except for the defensive touchdowns, and add it into what happened here against the Niners, where they got absolutely bludgeoned. And it was George Kittle and it was Christian McCaffrey doing the bludgeoning. It was Brock Purdy coming back and looking pretty good. It was the Cardinal defense getting absolutely shredded, which is not great because their coach is of defensive mind. That's not great. Anyway, Arizona season, like Atlanta's, like the zombie tier teams below them, pretty much cooked and pretty much done. It's just a matter of where they're going to fall in the draft by now. Atlanta, you don't have that luxury. Minnesota, season slipping away. Minnesota's another team that's in trouble, and the Vikings have looked pretty rough over the last few weeks, regardless of who their quarterback has been. J.J. McCarthy has been pretty sluggish at times. He makes too many mistakes and doesn't seem like he's kind of ready for this stage. He's not ready for that number 9 nickname. I don't know why that is still a thing, but it is still a thing. I will talk about Minnesota's game in a little bit, but they are in some really, really deep trouble. And in the Division of Doom, that's almost like you could kind of multiply the trouble that they're in by about 10 or 20 because their division's so good. Miami, a win streak. Yeah, they're on one right now. They've played pretty well over the last month, winning 3 out of 4. They've played some good football. Devon Achane's been spectacular over the last few weeks. Jordan Brooks gets another Player of the Week honor from the AFC, even though Myles Garrett went God mode in said week. He's been very impressive this year. He's been the league's leader in tackles for a lot of it. Very impressive work there. The Dolphins are going into a bye with some actual momentum, and they're playing 2 teams I've already talked about, coming out of it with the words of new starting their team name. Orleans and Jets. York Jets, I should say. They're in a decent spot to at least get to 6 and 7 and have a lot of us doing the shrug ridiculous dance. I guess we'll take the bitter with the sweet there. I'm sorry, Miss Mary, but it might have to happen. It might have to go down. I think we'll be okay. I think we'll do it if the Dolphins get to 6 and 7. Dallas, Offense rejuvenated. Yeah, they look good again. They look like they were ready to go, and they were cooking after this bye week. Now, I don't know if I can give the defense that same kind of grace because the Raiders' offense is so bad. And sure, it's easy to beat up on the Raider defense in theory because with Dallas' talent, they should be able to do that. Okay, understood. They'll be tested, both parties will be, on Sunday in their game against the Eagles. Of course, I'll be talking about that. Carolina, Bryce showed signs. That was impressive by Bryce Young. 449 yards, and he was cooking. He's had some games like that this year where he's looked really good, or he's had a clutch drive, or he's made some big plays this year. Like there's been some games by Bryce Young where it's like, okay, you can see it. You can see that there's a corner he's turning into. Now, unfortunately, he's followed it up too often with a game that is a dud, or he's not eligible to play in said game, like the Bills game, for example, and it just doesn't show consistently enough. But there are times where Bryce Young plays really, really well. We saw that here against Atlanta, against a good Falcons pass defense. Ted McMillan has also looked pretty solid lately as well. That's something else that we should also give flowers to. Can Carolina keep this up? Remember, they get Tampa Bay twice down the stretch. We'll see what Carolina's capable of. Jacksonville, that was unexpected. I can't figure Jacksonville out. I think a lot of people can't figure them out. On one hand, they have wins against Kansas City and the LA Chargers. These are tiebreaker wins that may come into play in a big-time way later on this season. They, on the other hand, have looked miserable at times, and Trevor Lawrence has looked awful at different points this season. Jacksonville is a puzzling team. They really are. And their receiving core is kind of beaten up badly. They're a messy squad. I don't know how long they can last. That is the ultimate question here. Can Jacksonville last long enough to get to the playoffs? We will see. One of the teams they're going to have to deal with? Houston. Harder than necessary. I don't know why it came down to a last-second field goal to beat the Titans, but that's what it was with the Texans. They, too, are going to be a team that's going to fight to the very end of this playoff chase in the AFC. Jacksonville and Houston do not play each other. Both teams won at home. Houston's game was that, and the Houston win is probably a game that Jacksonville's going to be kicking themselves over if they don't make the playoffs. Anyway, when it comes to the Texans, their defense yet again continues to do what they do. And Davis Mills has played at least decent, even though the offensive line in front of him is a mess. But we've already known this. Could Houston survive? And can Houston keep it together because that defense is really good? Can the offense do something, anything, to make sure that they can move forward and get to these playoffs? Speaking of the Texans, I will start there when it comes to games in this tier. Bills-Texans. Showdown tomorrow night in Houston. Buffalo dealing with that Texans defensive front where they've been known to give out a whole lot of beatings. The last time these two teams played each other was last year where Josh Allen got concussed, though. I mean, he had to, he was woozy. He was a little woozy. On a standing 8 count. Okay, he got concussed. Let's keep it a buck. And Houston ended up winning that game at the very end of it. And some of that because of Sean McDermott's terrible play calling. This is true. All this happened. Now, as I've mentioned many times, you can run on Buffalo. Can Nick Chubb be the next one to do so? Can Houston offensive line be good enough to provide said running lanes for this to happen? We'll need to see that on tomorrow night in Houston for the Texans to have a shot. Eagles, Cowboys, major showdown in Arlington. This could be Dallas' last stand, I think. If the Cowboys lose this game, I think we can consider this a wrap. If they win this game, okay, maybe they might have an actual shot here at making this postseason. They might have a decent shot. It's a monster game for a Cowboys team that desperately needs to win it. As for the Eagles, it's another one of those games where it's like, okay, they can put the NFC East, which is already kind of done, in a permanent chokehold, at least for the rest of the season. And when it comes to the NFC, keep the West off their backs, and for that matter, the Lions and the Packers, who they have tiebreakers on, and it could go after the Bears next week. But we'll talk about that next week. Let's get to the Wilmington, Delaware playoff tier. Kansas City could miss playoffs. I didn't think this was a possibility until last week, until they lost to Denver, that the Chiefs could actually miss the playoffs. It's in part not really because of their defense. They're healthy offensively. Mahomes has taken a step back, it seems. He has not looked like the same Pat Mahomes that terrorized the league for 6, 7, 8 years by now. It hasn't looked the same. They haven't felt the same for a majority of this season. And that to me is an absolute shock. They just don't look right. Can Kansas City keep it together, and can they pull it together? They're not going to have a choice but to. They might have to go 7-1 to get back to the playoffs at worst. LA Chargers, disastrous performance. What was that? What seriously was that by the Chargers against the Jaguars last week? Now, I already mentioned that Jacksonville's a pretty confusing team to talk about. The Chargers are too, in part because I don't know what Chargers team I'm getting. It feels like they want to botch more games than they already have this year, and then this egg that they laid over in Duval is just awful. It just looks like it's just stink. If you have a decent pass rush, you can get home and you can cause havoc to Justin Herbert, at least because this offensive line the Chargers are rolling out with is rather offensive to many people in various states in this country. Not necessarily in San Diego, though. They probably are okay with this. Anyway, the Chargers are on the board to miss the playoffs as well, I will say, because I don't trust their offensive line long enough to keep Herbert upright for the other part, the third of the schedule that's still remaining. They got the Chiefs one more time. That Jacksonville tiebreaker could also come in handy. We'll see what happens with the Chargers. Tampa Bay, a new challenger. They probably had a golden opportunity to basically put distance between them and the rest of the NFC South while Atlanta started to crater. But instead, Carolina's kind of sort of kept up with them. And now it's on the board that the Panthers could pass and catch and keep it moving as Tampa Bay kind of falters once again in November. It's not been a good month for the Bucs. They still got Carolina twice on their schedule this year, and those are going to be two monster matchups. They also have a major game I'm going to talk about this week. I will talk about that later. Pittsburgh, where Rodgers play. He's got somewhat of a broken bone in his wrist, and a Steeler team that I don't know if Mason Rudolph, if he has to be game planned against for a full week. I don't know how that works for them. I don't know how well that would work. And as we've seen over the years, at least this year, when it comes to this Steelers team, if their defense isn't going God mode, they're probably not winning a lot of these games. As we've seen against the Bengals last week, the defense went God mode. They went 4 turnovers. They went a couple turnovers and 2 defensive touchdowns. Some of this without Jalen Ramsey, and they looked absolutely absurd against the Bengals at times. If Pittsburgh's defense is able to do what we are expecting of them to do, they're going to win a lot of games, but only if their defense does that. San Francisco, George and Christian. Yeah, these two absolutely dominated the Cardinals and basically made that game a rout before anybody could really blink. The Niners, to their credit, while they've been very injury prone and very injury battered, have kept up somewhat with the two teams in front of them. They still have games. They still have a game with Seattle at home left. Now they split with the Rams, but they still have a game with Seattle at home left. And that's their last divisional game left standing, so they get to see them at the very end of the season. Can the Niners keep it up long enough to even steal the NFC West away from St. Louis, away from Los Angeles and Seattle? We'll see. Baltimore, ugly and pretty. On one hand, Lamar Jackson did not have a good game at all, and the offensive line in front of him also had a terrible game. Well, in part because of Myles Garrett, who's going to be a first-ballot Hall of Famer, but we already knew this. Pretty being the way the Ravens' defense continued to fight and keep them in this game long enough for Todd Monken to make one of the best play calls of the year with that fake tush push. Love what I saw out of that. I think that was a tremendous play call and way to outsmart a really good Cleveland defense. Baltimore probably needed to win a gritty game like this. I guess we needed to see that from them. And against a Cleveland team that's incredibly gritty and really good on defense. So that's probably good for the Ravens' sake. The showdowns with Pittsburgh may determine whether if one of these teams makes the playoffs at all, as opposed to the other, who would win the division. I'm looking forward to seeing both these games. Green Bay, the number 27. It's maddening to see how wild this is. Aaron Rodgers, when he won the Super Bowl, he was 27. Brett Favre, when he won his Super Bowl, he was 27. Jordan Love, currently speaking, is 27. The Packers have won 6 games this year. In 5 of them, they scored 27. That's how many they scored against the Giants. This is odd. This is very, very odd. If they score 27 against the Vikings this week, we know what time it is. Minnesota Miles just pack it up because the Packers with the number 27, they know what they're doing. 3 cubed is quite a thing. It really is. Chicago, noticeable changes. We can see it from this offense. They look vastly different now that they have a competent guy leading the charge in Ben Johnson. And Caleb Williams looks so much more composed and poised in year 2 as opposed to year 1. He just looks so much better. Kyle Monagai and DeAndre Swift bringing the thunder and the lightning that you needed, that Ben Johnson thrived with in Detroit. It's really working. The only guy not thriving in this offense is DJ Moore. Everybody else seems to be cooking. Maybe DJ Moore simply doesn't fit. Chicago could stand to trade him this offseason, but that's an offseason topic. As for now, the Bears have looked pretty good. Their defense has held it together as well, and they got a bunch of league leaders in NOs. They force a lot of interceptions. Good on them. And the Bears have a real shot to win the NFC North, the Division of Doom. They've got some big games left, obviously, 2 with the Packers, 1 with the Lions, but they've got a real shot at the Division of Doom. Good luck, Chicago. You'll need it. You'll need a lot of it. Speaking of which, they play the Steelers. So you got the 2 divisional leaders playing against each other, which means Aaron Rodgers once again is going to go back to Soldier Field and play against his arch op in the Bears. Many times Aaron Rodgers has decreed and shown by his play that he owns the Bears. He literally yelled it out loud. He still owns Chicago. And he wasn't wrong because, let's face it, he did. And there was nothing Chicago could say about it or do about it because it was like that. One last time can Aaron Rodgers show that he owns the Bears, or will Chicago beat their boogeyman once and for all? A major showdown in the battles of the North between the 2 kings. Let's see if Aaron Rodgers is healthy enough to play. I hope he is. Big game in that division. Speaking of the NFC North, Vikings, Packers, Minnesota, this might be your last stand. I don't know how much time you got left when it comes to competing with the other teams in this division because all 3 of them are playing relatively well and have put are starting to put distance between themselves and the Vikings. A monster game that Minnesota's got to have at Lambeau Field. Which means JJ McCarthy, you're going to have to play relatively well. And Minnesota defense is going to have to get some pressure, any amount of pressure on Jordan Love. If they can't, Green Bay may put up another 27, and that may be a little bit too much for Minnesota to deal with. Can the Packers stop Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison and company? James Naylor's actually had a really good sneaky season as a third receiver. He's been pretty impressive this year. He kind of goes under the radar because of Jefferson and Addison. Can he show up again? This is a crucial game and between these 2 teams. Minnesota needs this badly to stay in the NFC wildcard race. Green Bay needs it badly to keep up with the Lions and Bears. Monster game here in Green Bay. New York City title tier. Let's go there now. Detroit, 4th and 9. 5 times the Lions went forward on 4th down last week. 3 of them, at least, were 1 yard or shorter. They got none of these. That's really why they lost this game. Detroit went for it a lot. They passed the field goals in some of these and ultimately got nothing out of it, and that's where things went bad. Sure, the pass interference was terrible, but that doesn't necessarily explain how Jared Goff just didn't get anything done at all aside from getting the ball to Jahmyr Gibbs, the occasional Amon-Ra St. Brown play, and the Jameson Williams touchdown. Other than that, they really got nothing done. Maybe the loss to Sam Laporta hurts them a little bit more than we're letting on, but that was an ugly performance in Philly last week for the Lions. Buffalo, Josh Allen masterclass. This was a good bounce back after what was looking like 5 quarters of absolutely nothing going right for Buffalo. The 4 against Miami, and then the first one was looking a little sluggish. Allen with an NO early on, and it was not looking great for Josh Allen and the Bills. They still give up a lot of rushing yards. They give up over 200 against Tampa Bay this time. But they got it together because Josh Allen made absurd throws and was Superman once again. This was a masterclass. This was a brilliant performance by Josh Allen. I think you'll take the 2 NOs if you're getting 6 touchdowns to accompany them. I think everybody will take that. Buffalo still keeping up with the next team on this list, New England. Very efficient. That's just what they are. They're not overpowering when it comes to flash and style. But then again, many of my verbal teams are similar to this. They're not overly flashy, they're just generally good and generally efficient. It's maddening for the ops, yes, but they're just generally good at what they do. Trevion Henderson's been an excellent rookie. Drake May's been very good in year 2. This just a generally good team. And Christian Gonzalez, as great as he is, he's going to be tested this week, obviously dealing with T. Higgins, because Jamar Chase got suspended. But New England's just a generally good team. I still think they're schedule merchants. They'll be tested later on this year. They did pass their one Buffalo test, but I still believe they're schedule merchants, and that's part of the reason why they're 9-2. Seattle, is it midnight? Once again, there was a big game involving Sam Darnold. Once again, Sam Darnold was an abject disaster. But this time, the only difference between them and the Rams was a field goal. And Seattle couldn't get into close enough range for Jason Myers to bury a game-winning kick that would have won them the game and allowed them to steal a game in Los Angeles. Sam Darnold probably doesn't have another 4-0 game in him. At least I would like to think he won't. But if he does, we don't understand why. Because in big games, he's normally not like that. Seattle, to their credit, at least kept it close. And yet again, this is another loss of Seattle's where it comes down to the very end, and it comes down to a disastrous turnover somewhere by Sam Darnold. Yet again, it's becoming a very matinee trend, I'm sure, for Seahawks fans. Philadelphia, rejuvenated defense. The Jalen Phillips trade has given them a new lease on life, as they now suddenly have a capable pass rusher that can get home. And because of the two Georgia boys in the middle, he's almost always going to be singled up. It's almost always going to be a one-on-one situation. Now, unfortunately for the Eagles, it's not all good, because Lane Johnson's got the injury. He's going to be out for a month. That's a vital loss for an offensive line that, let's face it, has not looked all that great this year. There's a reason why Saquon Barkley hasn't really gone off that much this year, except for the Giants game, where there's just something missing here. There's that extra energy. Maybe it's Kevin Pachulo as the OC. It's just not happening there. Maybe it's A.J. Brown and the turmoil between him and Hurts, and that's a situation that needs to be rectified in the offseason. It's maybe any number of things. Up front, it just hasn't looked as fluid as you would expect it to. Can the Eagles get it together against Quentin Williams and company on the defensive side of Dallas? A vital game for the Cowboys, as I mentioned before. For the Eagles, yeah, you're going to win the division, sure. Now it's a matter of keeping the 1 seed away from the division of doom, LA and Seattle. Indianapolis, back to work. You had a bye week. You got a chance to rest and get fresh legs ready to roll for your next game and your next showdown, which I will talk about in a little bit. For the Colts, otherwise, not much else to say. You've been dominant for a lot of this year. You've been excellent for a lot of this year. You had the signature tiebreaker against Denver that you may desperately need later on this season. You got it off a leverage call, but you got the tiebreaker all the same. Indeed, there's not much else really to say negatively here. Jonathan Taylor for MVP. Keep it moving. LA Rams, winning ugly. That was a pretty ugly win for Los Angeles, but they will gladly take it, I'm sure. They were able to get under Sam Darnold's skin for the second time in about 10 months, and they were able to get out of LA with this W and basically survive a hard-charging Seattle team that got their act together in the fourth. Good work by Los Angeles, as yes, your losses may allow you to be kicking and screaming, and this definitely would have been one of those, but you got the job done this week. Can you keep this going and face a really good team in Tampa Bay? I will talk about that game in a little bit. But before I do that, I got to talk about the Broncos, who are number 1 once again. A signature win. We question Denver's legitimacy. We question whether the Broncos really belong here. We question whether they were basically the West Coast version of New England, where you're just schedule merchants. The answer is no. They're like that. Their defense is like that, but we already knew this. They were able to do this without PS2 and Alex Singleton on that front. Very impressive. They were able to do this without J.K. Dobbins, who's really helped stabilize that Bronco offense. It's a shame that J.K. Dobbins has these season-ending injuries almost without fail every single year. This is another one of those, and I hate it because J.K. Dobbins is a good running back when healthy. The problem is he never is. Denver got it together and kept it together. Despite their inefficiencies on offense, despite the chemistry issues between Troy Franklin and Bo Nix, which is weird because they went to college together, despite the offense not really getting into gear until the fourth quarter. And then at which point, Bo Nix becomes Bo Montana or something. It's a weird situation for that to happen, but Denver in the fourth quarter is as trustworthy as it gets in the NFL. The first three quarters, I wouldn't trust them any more than I would trust Tennessee on offense, to be honest with you. And for more on that, look at week 1, because they played and Tennessee was better for 3 quarters. Then Denver got together in the fourth. I hope y'all understand where I'm going with this. Anyway, let's get to the title tier games of interest. And let's talk about the Bucs and the Rams. Major Sunday night game, a game Tampa Bay's got to have. And we'll see if Tampa Bay gets any healthier at all with their running back situation, though they ran the ball tremendously well against a terrible run defense in Buffalo. This is a vital game that Tampa Bay desperately needs. And for the Rams to keep it moving and keep progressing and keep up with Seattle and the Eagles for the 1 seed in the NFC, they need this game too. A monster game for both these teams. For Matt Stafford and Puka Nacua, can they get back on track? Because last week was a bit sluggish against a really good Seattle defense. Can they get back on track there? And can the Tampa offensive line withstand the really good young pass rushers that the Rams have? Monster game on Sunday Night Football. And Tampa Bay going to face a Rams team that's really had their number over the last few years. Big game here. And the main event this week to me is this Kansas City's last stand. Colts-Chiefs, showdown in Arrowhead. These two teams have had some really fun playoff games in that building over the years. The Lynn Elliott game happened there. The game where there were no punts, and between the Chiefs and the Rams, and the Colts, I should say, where Peyton Manning outdueled Trent Green. They had Andrew Luck's final game was the game in the snow between the Colts and the Chiefs. A couple of years prior, Andrew Luck's first signature game was Colts-Chiefs, but that one was in Indianapolis. But the Colts got that game anyway. The Colts won that game, and that was the all-time choke by Andy Reid and company. The point of it being, these two teams have had a very fun history against each other. But this is a kind of a different stage here. On one hand, you got the Colts, who are obviously 9-2. They're coming off the bye. They're fresh. Jonathan Taylor's been amazing this year, and it hasn't mattered what defense has been in front of him. He's mowed them down with ease. Can he do it again? And can Daniel Jones avoid the New York Giants version of himself, where he turns over the ball quite a bit? Can he avoid that? Vital game for Indianapolis to keep up with Denver and New England for the 1 seed. Denver's off this week. And then there's the Chiefs, who are 5-5 and who need this game badly, and who need this game to keep up in the AFC, which is becoming very crowded by the day. A game that Kansas City's got to have, where if the Chiefs don't get it, that's another tiebreaker they lose. And Kansas City don't have too many of them right now. Matter of fact, they have none of them when it comes to a team that's in the playoffs. Baltimore's not there yet, because Baltimore's still recovering themselves. This is a game that Kansas City's got to have, and it's the first regular season got to have it game for the Chiefs in almost a decade. I didn't think we'd be here with Kansas City with Mahomes in his prime, but here we are. So there you have it. We're at the end of the power rankings as normal. A Sports Lounge page is going to have the picks as always, so check them out later today when I drop them, right around game time and probably a little bit before it when it comes to the Bills and Texans. Speaking of which, for the Railway recap, that will be the first stop of my next train of thought.